Welcome to Cracked Open, a podcast about life, love, loss, and the truths we discover along the way. Together, we'll explore the struggles that shape us, the lessons we carry, and the hope that keeps us moving forward. This is more than stories. It's honesty. It's healing. It's real. Let's get started. And now your host, Glen Nunes.
Have you ever loved someone, or prayed for someone, or believed in a miracle so deeply that you didn't know whether holding on was faith or fear? That's where I've been. Every morning I wake up asking God the same question. Am I trusting you, or am I refusing to let go? Because there's a difference between faith and control, between hope and obsession, and between waiting and refusing to move. There's a place that God wants us to live, and that's what we're talking about today. Learning to let go without giving up. Have you ever reached the place in your life where you honestly don't know what God wanted you to do anymore? Do I keep praying, or do I let go? Do I keep believing, or am I refusing to accept reality? Am I trusting God, or am I trying to control something that was never mine to control? Those questions can keep you awake at night. They can steal your peace. They can rob your joy. They can make you question your faith. And maybe you're waiting for a relationship to heal. I don't know. Maybe you're waiting for someone to come home. Or maybe you're waiting for a job. Or maybe you're waiting for a diagnosis to change. Or maybe you're simply waiting for one prayer to finally be answered. Today, we're going to talk about one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn. Learning to let go without giving up. What do you do when you're caught between what was and what will be? When the door behind you is slammed shut, but the one in front of you won't budge, won't even budge a bit. Some of us spend months, even years, waiting for a situation to finally make sense before we allow ourselves to be at peace. But what if peace isn't at the end of that road? What if it's meant to be found right here, in the messy middle? Because you cannot put your purpose on hold while you wait for someone else to make up their mind. Welcome to Cracked Open. I'm Glen Nunes. If you're joining me for the first time, thank you for being here. This podcast is for people living through real life situations. Maybe heartbreak, or maybe faith, depression, loss, healing, and hope as well. And none of us have it all figured out. I'm still certainly learning. Sometimes people assume that because I sit behind the microphone every week, I must have all the answers and everything figured out. But the truth is, most weeks, I'm learning the lessons right alongside everybody. This week's episode, it's one of those. Because letting go has never come naturally to me when I love deeply, and when I believe completely, and when I pray with everything I've got. But somewhere along the way, I had to ask myself a very uncomfortable question. Is holding on strengthening my faith, or is it slowly stealing my peace? And those aren't always the same thing. So today, let's talk about it. So I'm glad you're here with me today on Cracked Open. This is Season 3. It is Episode 12. And we're going to talk about the peace of the in-between. We're diving into how to stay standing when your circumstances are shifting like sand under your feet. This topic matters because most of life is in the waiting rooms. And if we don't learn to find stability there, we'll spend our whole lives shaking. This is Cracked Open, Season 3, Episode 12. The peace of the in-between. Learning to let go without giving up. So before we dive into the heart of today's message, I want to address something practical about how this show comes together. On one of my recent episodes that I was covering relationship narcissism, a listener reached out to me and she introduced me to a series of online support forums where people completely isolated by trauma bonds and things like that, they go to find guidance, knowledge, and survival strategies. So since then, I've been reading tons of testimonies on these forums. I'm obsessed with them lately. And these incredible real-world case studies have literally been falling onto my lap. I don't look at it as a coincidence either. I look at it as God is orchestrating these stories to place them directly into this microphone because the lessons are too powerful to ignore. And as I do my research, I add things that will benefit the conversation. And recently, these divine stories have been sticking right out. So if you're currently struggling in the dark, you can just Google these support networks and find thousands of people, literally thousands, standing in your exact shoes, discovering the precise direction needed to escape the smoke. That brings me directly to a specific post that I discovered this week that maps out the exact anatomy of victory. It is this raw testimony of how one woman finally found her power. She took her house back, and she achieved total peace by weaponizing absolute cold steel silence. Last week, we talked about a tragic wreckage of someone staying too long. We talked about that empty apartment, the burned bridges, and the terrifying cost of giving a narcissist one too many chances. But today, I want to talk about the exact moment where the storm stops. I want to talk about the woman who finally does pull the trigger. The one who forced the exit. She stands up and she steps up into the quiet space right after the monster's gone. I call this episode The Peace of the In-Between, because when you finally kick a toxic person out of your life, the silence that follows isn't always comfortable. At first, it can feel like withdrawal. It can feel like panic. But if you handle it right, that empty space becomes the most powerful, peaceful sanctuary you have ever known. So I was back on that same online support forum a few nights ago. I was looking for answers on how people survive the initial cleanup phase. And I found a post by a woman that completely stopped me in my tracks. The title of her post was, "He threatened to ruin my life if I left, so I stopped playing by his rules." That's what the title was. So let me read you a piece of what she wrote. This thing was pretty long, and I'm going to just give you a piece of it. She writes this: "The narcissist wouldn't leave. When I finally demanded a divorce, he turned into a terrorist. He hacked my iPad. He cloned my emails, installed tracking devices and apps on my phone, and probably had listening devices and cameras installed without me knowing. He read my private journals. He used everything as leverage. He threatened to call my ex-husband's lawyers to ruin my custody case. He threatened to target a young family member who was staying with me. I found out that he had stolen money from my account, and he had told me that if I forced him out, that he would burn my entire world into the ground. So I was like paralyzed by fear." So she went on to write this: "But then I realized something. I was trying to be nice to a monster. I was trying to reason with a parasite. I had to stop fighting him out loud and start outsmarting him in the dark. I had to become wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove. I didn't threaten him back. I didn't scream. Instead, I went completely cold and silent. While he was busy gloating, I secretly went to a tech professional and wiped every hidden tracking app off my devices. I changed every password to encrypted strings that he could never guess. I quietly documented every single extortion text and blackmail threat that he sent to me. I handed a folder over to my lawyer with everything in it. I quietly relinked arms with my family and all the people who actually loved me, telling them exactly what he was threatening to do. And then, with my boundary locked in place, I enforced his exit. I carefully and meticulously designed an ambush with all my close ones, and it worked. The nightmare was in recovery. We had changed all the locks, we placed all his belongings in a pod container, and when he arrived, my army was waiting with me on the lawn as I handed him his restraining order and finally told him, 'Don't ever step foot near me or my home again.' And when he tried to threaten me one last time, he realized his claws couldn't grip me anymore. He had no leverage left. The security gates were shut." And then she goes on. And when we read a story like that, we have to take a look at what she did next. She concluded her post by saying this: "The day he finally walked out, I sat on my couch in total silence. My privacy was mine again. My journals were mine again. My kids were safe. And I don't know what my future looks like yet, I haven't rebuilt everything, but I am in the in-between. But for the first time in years, I can breathe. The air in my own house belongs to me again. This is the peace of the in-between. Letting go of a toxic relationship doesn't mean giving up on your future. It means changing your strategy. It means realizing that you cannot manage a narcissist. It's biological. This type of person can never change, ever. And if you want, go read Dr. Phil's theory on that. It's so accurate. It's who they are for life. And you cannot appease an extortionist. You have to starve them of information. You have to shut down their access to your mind, your email, your privacy, and your life. And if you're listening to this today, and you're living in that digital prison, if someone is holding your peace hostage with threats, tracking apps, and prison tactics, I want you to hear me. Stop negotiating with the terrorist. Be harmless as a dove. Keep your heart pure. Do not become ugly like them. Be wise as a serpent. Lock down your perimeters in silence. Gather your evidence. Lean on the people who are patiently waiting for you to be safe. The in-between is not an empty, lonely void. It's a clean, secure fortress where you get to rebuild your life on your own terms. And the storm, it will end the exact moment that you decide to stop letting the chaos inside your house. Thank you for your loyalty, and thank you for coming back if you're a repeat listener. But tonight, I'm coming to you straight from the furnace, man. Season 3, Episode 12. We're talking about peace of the in-between. Most people think that letting go means quitting, but it doesn't. And others think holding on always means faith, but it doesn't. Sometimes we hold on because we trust God, and sometimes we hold on because we're terrified of losing what we love. And sometimes we honestly cannot tell the difference. Let me try to define this topic for you as best I can. We all know the agony of limbo, right? It's waiting for that other shoe to drop feeling. Maybe it's a relationship that keeps looping, a contract that's gone silent. Maybe it's a legal battle where all the answers are being delayed. Psychologically, human beings absolutely hate uncertainty. We crave closure, and when we don't have it, our brains go into hyper-vigilance overdrive, creating worst-case scenarios in the dark just to feel like we're prepared for the pain. We get stuck into a loop of what if, and it drains every single ounce of joy out of the present moment. We mistake constant obsession and anxiety for fighting for our lives, when in reality, we're just letting a phantom control our peace. Have you ever noticed that almost every Christian has heard these two phrases? Never give up, and you need to let it go. Which one is it? Because sometimes they sound like complete opposites. Here's what I've learned. God never tells us to give up on Him, but He does ask us to surrender control. And those are two very different things. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold everything together, holding on to people, holding on to plans, holding on to dreams, holding on to hopes, holding on to the way we thought life was supposed to turn out. And then one day, life reminds us that we're never in control to begin with. That's one of the hardest lessons we'll ever learn, because we confuse control with faith. And we think if we just pray harder, love harder, wait longer, say the perfect words, somehow we can change another person's heart. But only God can do that. And that's not our job. Our job is faithfulness, and God's job is transformation. So maybe the greatest act of faith isn't holding on tighter. Maybe it's trusting God enough to loosen our grip. Because letting go isn't saying God can't. Letting go is saying, God, I know you can, even if I can't. I think one of the greatest misconceptions in Christianity is believing that surrender means quitting. But it doesn't. Surrender means I'm done trying to do God's job so I can get back to doing mine. And my pastor, Brian, I talk a lot about him on these podcasts, and he's a big influence. I value a lot of his words. But he talks a lot about his testimony and working with Teen Challenge. So he speaks about the exact moment that he hit absolute dead-end rock bottom. He confessed that when he finally checked into that rehab facility, he didn't even think he was going to survive or change his life. He literally says he was slowing his lifestyle down for a while because he wasn't ready to die yet. He was completely paralyzed, out of options, and he was totally broken. And he looked up at heaven. He said, I am done. I have nothing left. And when Brian speaks of this, he says this next. He says that exact second he surrendered, God looked down and said, good, you're done. Now I can finally start. But you have to hit the floor before you can see the sky. It reminds me of that 32-year-old girl's forum story that I shared with you on the last podcast. The one that hit an absolute nerve with a bunch of people who have reached out to me. She spent 5 years trauma bonded to a narcissist, constantly promising her family and her forever lover and her friends that I'm leaving him this weekend, I promise. But she never pulled the trigger. She never let herself hit rock bottom because she kept using the people who loved her as an emotional safety blanket to soften the blow. And because she refused to surrender the chaos, she ended up completely alone in an empty apartment with nobody left to answer her calls and nobody to help her pick up the pieces. When you refuse to do your job and change the locks, God cannot do his job and heal your house. And there's a deep clinical reason this hurts so much, because our brains view uncertainty as a literal threat to our physical survival. When you don't know where you stand, your system naturally starts scanning for clues, tracking data, and trying to micromanage outcomes that aren't yours to control. That is a trap. And as I was doing my research, I found this. To survive the limbo, you must possess emotional anchoring. When the external world is chaotic, you have to find internal anchors. Things like your routine, your values, and your faith that do not change regardless of what the scoreboard says. If you don't anchor yourself within your own territory, you'll constantly accept cheap breadcrumbs of attention because you're too terrified of the quiet room. But I'll be honest with you, I'm walking that road right now. I recently found myself thrown back into a situation I thought I had moved past. I was looking for clarity, looking for an answer, and honestly, I was a mess. I felt like I couldn't move forward until I knew exactly what was going to happen next. But then I realized I was letting an uncertain future rob me of a certain God. I realized I can't put my purpose on hold while I wait for someone else to make up their mind. It's just not healthy. And as I was looking for these answers, honestly, my mind was in a rut. I felt like I couldn't move forward or breathe until I knew exactly what was going to happen. I was sitting in the total quiet of my house, listening to the silence, letting the adrenaline run circles in my chest. But now I'm trying to control my fuel, my craft. I'm trying to control my boundaries. And recently I was reading through a grief and transition support forum last week, and I stumbled across a post written by a father that should make every one of us think. The title of his post was simply, I had to let go of the rope to save my own lungs. He wrote, for 4 years, I watched my adult son slide down a dark path of total self-destruction. He lost his job, he ruined his health, and he was allowing toxic, terrible people to completely control his life and steal all his money. And because I'm his father, my immediate instinct was to be his savior. Every single weekend, I would step in, pay his bills, bail him out of his mess, and offer to walk him through his storm. I put my own marriage, my own finance, and my own peace completely on hold to hold a rope for him. But last month, I woke up. I realized that by always being there to catch him, I was actually funding his comfort in the mud. My anxiety and obsession weren't helping him heal. It was just keeping me attached to his suffering. I had to look at my son and deliver the hardest words of my life. I said, I love you with all my heart, but I will not drown with you. The safety net is gone. I'm letting go of the rope, and I'm locking my door. I will pray for your healing every day from a distance, but I will not look at your face again until you choose to clean up your own house. It was one of the most agonizing silence of my life. But 3 weeks after I went completely dark, the reality of the cold room hit him. Without my safety blanket, he finally stood up, and he checked himself into recovery. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop trying to save what is actively destroying your own soul. And can I be honest with you? This isn't a message I decided to preach because I figured everything out. It's a message I'm living. There have been days that I've begged God for answers, days I questioned everything, days I've wondered if my prayers were even reaching heaven. I wrestled questions like, Lord, do I keep believing? Do I keep waiting? Do I keep praying? Or am I supposed to let this go? If you've ever asked those questions, you're not alone. I know what it's like to replay conversations, to wonder if one more phone call, one more conversation, one more text would somehow change everything. I know what it's like to carry someone in your heart every single day. And I also know what it's like to realize I can't make another person choose me or fix anything until they fix themselves. That was one of the hardest truths I've ever had to accept. Because when somebody tells you something and you believe them, obviously you should. Say this has happened a few times, but this time it sounds different, it looks different, and you believe them. And then you find out all along they had no intentions of following through. Never. And it's just, the cycle just starts over again. It's really hard to accept. But you know what? You just have to face it. It is what it is. You just have to start accepting people are who they are. And there's nothing you can do about it. I go for walks and jogs pretty much every day or a few days a week. I did a lot of thinking on my walk this morning, and I came to a hard, unvarnished realization about human relationships. We like to say we know when someone is truly in love with us, but the cold truth is nobody, absolutely nobody but God knows what is truly inside another person's heart, mind, and soul. You can feel things, you can read the signals, but most of the time, what we call certainty is just our own hope dressed up with reality. We protect what we want to feel because we're too terrified to face the truth. But let me give you the ultimate concrete test of true love. True love never takes a gamble on losing you if it has the power to hold on. If somebody truly loves you, if they value your soul, there is no excuse heavy enough, no circumstance chaotic enough, and no loop messy enough that would make them willing to risk losing you for a single second of their life. If there is no urgency to fix the layout, if there's nothing but an endless string of excuses, then it isn't reality. It's just your hope. Because when you love someone, you don't willfully put them through hell while watching them burn. I know how my own heart works. I would die before I let the people I love sit in the furnace. And sometimes I look at the ceiling and ask, why, God? Why did you make me this way? I have these massive, deep feelings. This protective instinct. And sometimes I wish that he didn't pick me to carry this weight. I wish I was just an everyday, normal person who could just nip out and just ignore the smoke. Being unique and being peculiar and being chose to carry a gold standard doesn't benefit me. It hurts, actually. It bleeds my own temple dry while everyone else reaps the rewards of my kindness. But God built this frame for a reason, and I refuse to compromise the standard. Because if you've tried more than anything you've tried in your heart and fought and waited, and if you've done every single thing you can, more than anybody that you know has ever done or ever would, and you've done every possible thing you can, there comes a time when you have to say, okay, I get it now. But here's another truth. Accepting what I can't control doesn't mean I stop loving. It doesn't mean I've stopped praying. It doesn't mean I've lost hope. It simply means I'm putting that person back into God's hands because they were never mine to carry in the first place. I don't know what your situation is, but if you have a situation similar to what I'm talking about and something changes and you do get a phone call and it's a solid plan and maybe they're going to follow through with you as a partner, as a team, absolutely. I say do it. But if it's just another breadcrumb or a false hope or a crock of bullshit, don't fall for it. Red flags are red for a reason. And I'm talking about relationships right here, but I was also talking about that father and son, because some of you aren't carrying a relationship. You might be carrying a son who's addicted, or a daughter who's walked away, or a spouse with cancer, or a marriage that's falling apart, or a dream that never happened, or a prayer that you've been praying for days or months or even years, whatever it is. If you're exhausted, I understand. I really do. Because faith doesn't always feel like certainty. Sometimes faith feels like waking up every morning and choosing to just trust God for one more day. Faith can be as simple as that. And that being said, what does the Bible actually teach us about letting go? Let's look at a few people who had to learn the lesson the hard way. One of the things that has encouraged me is realizing that almost everyone God used had to learn how to surrender something that they loved. Abraham had to surrender Isaac. Joseph had to surrender years of his life in a prison that he didn't deserve. David had to surrender the timing of becoming king. Hannah had to surrender her longing for a child. The father of the prodigal son had to surrender control over his son's choices. Martha and Mary had to surrender their understanding of why Jesus waited before coming to Lazarus. And even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." But then he said something that every one of us struggles to say. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." Notice something. Jesus didn't stop asking. He surrendered the outcome, and that's a huge difference. So looking at this scriptural steel, God speaks directly into this tension. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6 say, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Notice the law of that text. It commands you to lean not on your own understanding. That means it's okay if the layout doesn't make sense to your human math right now. So stop trying to solve the timeline in the dark. Recognizing God's hand in a relationship brings more than temporary excitement. It produces a lasting sense of peace, security, and belonging. The right person will not draw you away from what God's purpose is, but will walk beside you with faith, love, and commitment. His guidance provides confidence that what he brings into your life is built on a foundation that can endure every season. People will not walk away from you. You will know. And waiting on God's timing is never wasted because he prepares both hearts before bringing them together. His plans are marked by wisdom, patience, and genuine love that offers comfort instead of confusion. God is not a God of confusion. And as you continue to trust him, he leads you towards relationships that reflect his goodness and create a place where your heart can truly rest. Exodus 14:14, we're reminded the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Stillness isn't weakness. Stillness is supreme military confidence. And finally, Philippians 4:7. It promises a peace that transcends all understanding. This isn't peace that comes because your problems are solved or your driveway is empty. It's a peace that comes because you refuse to carry the weight alone. So what do we do when we're in the in-between? You can't control how someone else feels. You can control your workout, your prayer life, and showing up for this podcast, right? And don't suffer through a breakup or a failure that hasn't even happened yet. Deal with today's trouble. I don't know what your situation is in, but deal with today's trouble. Release the pressure of needing things resolved by Friday. Peace doesn't have a deadline. If a conversation or a person leaves you guessing and drained, step back. You need that energy for your healing. Stick to your routines. When life feels like a mess, your morning ritual provides a sense of safety. If someone has told you they're going to do something by a certain deadline and they don't, hey, take a step back and freeze your patience. Just stop and take a step back and say, okay, if they're going to make the right move, they're going to, but you have to protect your peace. And what do we do physically when we're caught in the in-between? I think sometimes we've accidentally taught people that faith means never asking questions. But that's not what I read in Scripture. David asked questions, Job had questions, Jeremiah had questions, Habakkuk asked questions. Even Jesus cried, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" God isn't afraid of your questions. Actually, he's inviting you to keep bringing them to him. Biblical surrender is not saying, God, I don't care anymore. It's saying, God, I care deeply, but I trust you more than I trust myself. And that doesn't remove the pain. It doesn't erase the tears. It doesn't make the waiting easier. But it does change who's carrying the weight. Maybe the greatest burden you're carrying today is one God never asked you to carry alone. So how do we actually do this? What does letting go look like on a Tuesday afternoon when you're still hurting, when the phone hasn't rung, when the prayer still hasn't been answered? Let's talk about that. How do we actually let go without giving up? I don't think it happens all at once. I think it happens one surrender at a time. And letting go of the need to control, that's probably the hottest one for me. I want to fix everything. I wanted the right conversation, the right timing, the right words, because I believe if I just said the perfect thing, everything would change. Then I realized, though, changing hearts has never been my responsibility. It's God's job. Mine is simply just to love well, to speak the truth, to trust him, and to keep praying for people, especially those who are near and dear to your heart. And as I told you earlier, how my pastor Brian talks a lot about his testimony with Teen Challenge when he hit absolute rock bottom, and how the moment that he surrendered and God could finally start rebuilding his life, explaining how you have to hit the floor before you can see the sky. And if you want to know what that looks like when you refuse to do the right thing and how unfortunate, unnecessary lessons happen, listen to what happened to me yesterday. I was standing with some friends at a venue. We were watching another friend perform with her band. My friend's girlfriend introduced me to a few girls that she ran into there. And when she said, hey, this is Glen Nunes, he plays in a duo. And one of the girls said, Glen Nunes, the podcaster? It was the first time someone's ever called me a podcaster. And it was interesting. So I said, I have a podcast channel. So I guess, yes, I am a podcaster. But yeah, that's me. And she made her way towards me and she started a full-blown conversation about something that I just reposted. One of my episodes on narcissism. She saw a clip on Instagram, she said. And then she liked the channel and she listened to the whole episode. So she looked me right in the eye and she said, your podcast is a mirror. I said, a what? She said, it's a mirror. She said, I listened to that podcast and I want to tell you something. She said, I got involved with a narcissistic scumbag who didn't have a pot to piss in. He had lied to me. He made me think he was successful or he was somebody he wasn't. And this is what they do. And eventually, he crawled his way into my house. That's the word she used. And she said, before I woke up, he completely taken over my territory. He made me start feeling that I was living in an actual prison without the bars in my own home. He brought his 3 kids literally into the layout of my house. He turned my daughter's bedroom into a sanctuary for his own family. She said, I felt that I knew it was wrong, but stupidity let it happen. And now I said, why? I knew I didn't or never would have loved this guy. I knew there was going to be no future and someday he would just be a bad memory, but I let it happen. I don't know why. And then she looked at me with her heart completely broken. And she started getting very emotional and she was almost crying. I could hear her voice quivering. And she said, my daughter had gone off to college. And I always promised her, no matter what happens, you'll always have a roof over your head and this is your home. After her daughter had finished college, she had met up with this older guy. She told her mom that she was going to move in with the guy. And I told her, after I met him, that I didn't think it was a good idea, but I allowed it. Because she was old enough, I couldn't do anything about it. But when my daughter's relationship failed and she tried to come back to her safe harbor, her home, I had to look at her and say, I don't have your room anymore. The drill sergeant had taken it for his kids because she said that's what we used to call him behind his back because my daughter thought he was such a controlling, rotten person. So my daughter nicknamed him the drill sergeant and her daughter did not like him. And she said after all was said and done, the scumbag finally was gone, but the wreckage was permanent. She said her best friend no longer was her best friend. They stopped talking for a while because he slowly took all of her closest ones away from her. Her exact words were, one by one. But she did say her and her best friend made kind of amends, but now they're just like a casual acquaintance. They're definitely not best friends anymore. And she said her daughter said that she will never trust or believe a word that she says ever again for the rest of her life. And she said it breaks my heart every day to know that. At this point, she started crying. She said, I just sit in my house every single day, carrying all the weight of this, all this stuff that I allowed this drill sergeant to destroy. I had allowed this guy to destroy my life. And it blew me away because I've been talking about all these similar type of these stories that I read and I tell you about from those support forums. It was so interesting. And it really made me think because a lot had happened that day. This stuff's been just falling on my lap. This other guy that I hadn't seen in a while walked up and he approached me. And he said, hey man, how's things going? So I briefly got into my situation at the current time and he asked me bluntly. He said, what? Why didn't you just let that crap go, man? I told him, man, I just told him a few things, how I felt about the situation. And he said, I hear you, man, I hear you. He said, just tell me one reason why you would even entertain being treated like this or being in this situation. Why? I said, look, I know it looks really bad, and I get it. But people don't understand because they're not living in my shoes. But I can tell you one solid reason. He said, okay. He said, you get it? I said, I do. He goes, all right, what's the reason? I said, this person's my best friend. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, she's your best friend. I said, yeah. He said, that's how a best friend treats a best friend? He was like, wow, come on, dude. Seriously, Glenn? I wanted to break down right there. I wanted to just fall on the ground. Broke me. But I slowly diffused the conversation and I didn't want to talk about it anymore. So I guess it's an eye-opener because I really have to start listening to what I talk about here on this channel. And I always say I don't have it figured out, and I don't. But I say things to help people, and I really do from my experiences. But one thing he said to me, and I'm going to say right now, and it made a lot of sense, he said, you have to start helping yourself, dude. So I guess I really just have to start listening to my own podcast and listen to myself because it was very true. And like that girl, she had to learn the hard way. I guess when we're in situations as hers, or if we get in situations that are uncomfortable or we know that are wrong, I guess maybe the best thing to do is follow our heart and maybe start listening to people around us, because when you burn bridges, they're very hard to repair, and sometimes burnt bridges are irreparable. And in the end, if we make these wrong moves or we don't make the right moves, I guess we're the ones that have to be held responsible for all the mishaps and the misfortune that we bring into our lives. We can't blame anybody else. God can't heal your physical and your spiritual house until we either smarten up or we hit rock bottom. Because there's no in-between piece there. And there's no option C. Because we all have deadlines for God. Lord, by next month, by Christmas, by summer, by this, by that. But God has never once looked at his calendar and said, oops, I'm running late. God's delays are not God's absence. Sometimes they're his preparation. So let go of the fear, because fear tells us if this doesn't happen, your life is over. But faith says, even if this doesn't happen the way I imagine, God's still writing the story, man. I know it's hard. It's really hard. But fear has never written a better ending. Trust has. You have to trust the process. And you have to let go of bitterness. Bitterness feels like protection, but it's really a prison. It convinces us that we're punishing someone else, while quietly we're poisoning our own heart. Forgiveness doesn't erase the hurt. It simply refuses to let the hurt become who we are. But just the other day I was talking to a friend, and he said to me, Glenn, you are agonizing over why this door closed. He looked at me and he said, you need to realize that sometimes when a door slams shut, you didn't just survive a wreck, you dodged a bullet. It made me look at the scoreboard with absolute unvarnished logic. When we operate out of lack of boundaries, our hope blinds us to the actual facts of the situation. We ignore the chaos, we ignore the history of bad decisions, and we ignore the wreckage because we want to be the savior. But sometimes, the absolute worst case scenario is the greatest blessing in disguise. If that person ran into an easy, comfortable shortcut, they would just keep running from the truth for another 10 years. But when everything around them goes to pieces and safety nets vanish and illusion shatters, you don't have to wish bad luck or bad will on anyone. The consequences of accountability will always deliver the verdict. Your only job is to stop standing under the roof that is actively collapsing. Lift your chin up and trust that the ending that you're crying over is actually a divine redirection to your own upgrade. You have to start thinking like that. And you guys know I talk about my personal stories. In the beginning of a terrible road that I was on, somebody said the same exact thing to me. You dodged the bullet. And then after numerous torturous, rotten events, someone said it to me again. You dodged the bullet. And it's funny how after all time has gone by, the same comment comes up. You may have dodged the bullet. And if someone's telling you instead of showing you that they choose you, but they actually show you what they really choose, just like Mel said, let them. Just let them. It'll all play out. And somebody, a very close person, said 2 comments to me and called somebody 2 things. And I was heartbroken for them because it hurt me. But it stayed in the back of my head. And the 2 things they said, they weren't good. I look at the situation now and all the defending I was doing, and it's another hard truth to live with. Sometimes you have to admit maybe people were right, and maybe you were the one wrong. Maybe your heart was just blinded because you love so much. Because no matter what, you're going to be you. But you know what? They're also going to be them. So you have to be alert and protect your heart. It made me look at things a lot differently, with some logic to it. Sometimes blessings are lessons, and sometimes lessons are blessings. We've all heard that, right? When we're caught up in that trauma loop, we feel completely incomplete. It's like you're in the kitchen cooking a layout of your life. You have the financial stability, the roof over your head, and that person that you thought was your missing piece. Everything's perfect, right? You have all the ingredients. Then suddenly, one crucial ingredient is taken away from the counter. You feel broken. You think you can't finish the product. But what does a chef do? He doesn't throw the whole meal, or if it's a baker, he doesn't throw the cake away in the dumpster, does he? You Google it. You Google the strategy. You look at the blueprint, and you find a high-value substitute, right? You substitute that void with the Bible, with the gym, with music, or a genuine clean connection that God drops out of the sky like an angel to protect your spirit. The product will get finished, and you can still complete your masterpiece. And what I mean by that, you ever been in the kitchen and you're cooking something and then you're missing that one ingredient and you go, oh man. Then you research it and you say, oh, I can substitute this for that. That's kind of what I'm saying here. That sometimes you have to find a substitute. If it's a relationship, it could be another person. If it's something you're trying to let go of. And I'm not talking a rebound. I'm talking a genuine, decent human being. Not some parasite or some distraction. And if you're wondering how you're going to survive the warfare while you wait for that recipe to bake, let's just take a small look at the nature of creation. I was out on my patio the other day, and there was a million of these red ants. They came out of nowhere. It was like this whole strip of them, and it was crazy. It was so many of them. And I got some pesticides and killed all those ants. But then I started looking at these ants, and I was like, wow. So I started doing some research on how they actually survive. So when a single red ant is trapped and it's isolated and it's under attack, it doesn't just give up. It releases this unseen chemical distress signal into the atmosphere. It's crazy. And that second that call goes out, the colony instantly displays a massive, overwhelming army to rescue them and defend the perimeter. It's crazy. Hear what I'm trying to say today. That is exactly how a warrior's prayer works. When your soul is crushed and you release a distress cry to heaven, God instantly deploys an unseen army of angels to hold your perimeter line. It's the same way prayers work, because real transformation only happens when someone is ready and willing to do the hard work themselves. We can offer unshakable support, guidance, and love, but we cannot want freedom for them more than they want it for themselves. Stop trying to pull a nail out of the wood when that nail on the other end is determined to stay twisted. And you can pause the screen right here and look at the actual visual of what I'm talking about. This is it right here. Save your energy for those who are ready to grow with you, starting with that person who's staring back at you in the mirror. Like that lady Mel says on her famous podcast, let them go. Let it lay out. You don't have to force an outcome or negotiate it with a terrorist. The default judgment always plays out. You will come out on top, and you will have your peace and your sanity and your life back before you know it. And remember, your character shapes your reputation, and your integrity shapes your legacy. And your legacy may be someone else's hope. Welcome home to your own soul. And never let go of God, never. Out of everything we've talked about today, this is the one thing I hope you remember, that you may need to let go of control. You may need to let go of your timeline. You may need to let go of fear. You may need to let go of bitterness. But don't ever let go of God, because there will be days when He's the only one still holding on to you. And sometimes the strongest grip of faith looks like an open hand. I want to say that again. Sometimes the strongest grip of faith looks like an open hand. It kind of captures the whole episode in that one image. It's not about dropping what matters. It's about opening your hand and saying, Lord, I'm trusting you with what I can't hold together anymore. And can I tell you something that I've never really wanted to admit out loud? There's been nights when I didn't even know what else to pray. I had already asked. I had already cried. I had already read my Bible. I had already gone to church. I had already believed. And I just sat there in complete silence, wondering, God, what do you want from me? Have you ever been there? Where you're not losing your faith, you're just running out of strength? Maybe that's where you're at today. Is that you? Maybe you're tired, not physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. It's a terrible place to be in, man. It's draining. Maybe you're tired of carrying something that feels heavy every single day. But then, this is what finally hit me, and I hope it hits you. Maybe God wasn't asking me to carry it. Maybe I picked it up because I love somebody, because I cared, because I wanted to fix it. But somewhere along the way, I started carrying all the weight that God never asked me to carry. We do that, don't we? We carry guilt that's not ours. We carry fear about tomorrow. We carry responsibility for other people's decisions. We carry shame from yesterday. We carried unanswered prayers. We carry all this stuff like they're ours to solve. When somebody does something, like lies to your face, or does something and you find out and you're hurt and you get upset and you say things and then you feel guilty about it later, you know what? Just pray to God, don't feel guilty. You have to be responsible for your own actions, but you also have to hold other people responsible for theirs. And you have to really look and evaluate the whole situation and figure out what's best for your peace. And then after all that, sometimes you just slow down. It's too much. And then that one day we collapse. And not because God abandoned us, but because we're trying to be God. So think about that. Not on purpose, not because we're arrogant, but because we love deeply and we care deeply. And we don't want to lose what matters. You wish you could shake it into people. But what if letting go isn't God asking you to love less? What if He's asking you to trust Him more? Just let it go. You know, when a little child is scared, they don't carry the suitcase. They reach for their father's hand. Maybe that's what faith really is. Not carrying every burden yourself, but reaching for the Father's hand while He carries what you can't. Think about that famous painting by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The creation of Adam. I want you to zoom in and look at that image. My son Zachary is the one that brought this to my attention. We were talking yesterday, and a lot of really good stuff came out, really personal and meaningful father and son talk. It was just an awesome conversation, and it led him to add this to the conversation. So he told me to zoom in on the image. He said, look at God's hand in that picture. Every muscle, every tendon is strained to the absolute limit. He is stretching out across the entire universe, pouring every source of divine effort into bridging the gap. But look at Adam, he said. Adam is slouching backward, lazy, with a limp, bent finger. He expects the connection to be handed to him without moving an inch of his own temple. Their fingers are inches apart, but they aren't touching because man refuses to match the effort. And he also pointed out it looks like a brain that's around God, and he was pointing all this stuff out. But that point right there that I just said, I found it really interesting that he showed me that. I'd never seen it before. And I just thought it was interesting that he pointed all this stuff out to me. And if you're listening today with tears in your eyes, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, and your heart is breaking, if you're waiting, if you're grieving, or whatever you're going through, if you're wondering whether God even hears your prayers anymore, hear me. Your tears are not proof that God has left you. Sometimes they're proof that you're still brave enough to love, and don't be ashamed of that. Just don't mistake your tears for God's presence, because maybe, just maybe, God isn't asking you to stop loving. He's teaching you how to love without trying to control the ending. This is where the law of accountability comes down flat-footed on the stone. When you hit rock bottom and when you're faced with a definitive, life-altering choice and you must live with the consequences of your actions, you have two roads in front of you. You either straighten your frame up, just like the addicted boy when his father finally had the courage to let go of the rope, or you end up entirely alone in a silent room like that 32-year-old woman who burned every bridge to protect a monster. When you choose to tolerate a parasite, you are taking a reckless, terrifying gamble. You're gambling with your peace, your sanity, your kids, and worst of all, you're gambling with a once-in-a-lifetime person who would have died to protect you. And once that door closes, the safety net does not come back. You have to make your choice, and you have to stand in the reality of what it cost you. It's your choice. Where does this leave us? If we're letting go but we're not giving up, what does tomorrow morning look like? Tomorrow morning, you get up, you pray again, you go to work, you run your errands, you love your family, you keep your integrity, you keep your heart soft, you refuse to become bitter, and then you trust God with everything that you can't do. Hope isn't pretending life doesn't hurt. Hope is waking up, fully aware that it hurts, and believing that God is still writing a story that you can't fully see yet. Sometimes we think faith means standing on the mountaintop shouting, I believe. But sometimes faith is whispering through the tears, Lord, I still trust you. And I want to challenge you this week. Sometimes I put challenges on this podcast. I want you to think about one thing, just one, that you've been gripping on so tightly that it's stealing your peace. It might be a relationship. It might be a fear. It might be a dream. It might be something you have to do. It might be a prayer that you prayed 1,000 times. Don't stop praying. Don't stop loving. Don't stop hoping. But open your hands and say, God, I can't carry this anymore. I'm giving it to you. Help me trust you one day at a time. That's your challenge. Try and do that. Physically do it. And here's the truth. The in-between is where real faith is forged. Anyone can have peace when the bank account's full and the relationship's perfect. But the version of you that survives the uncertainty is the version of you that can handle anything. You aren't being punished in the waiting. You're being prepared. Always try to remember that. And what I just challenged you to do, when I said pick one area of uncertainty that's keeping you up at night, I want you to literally write that down on a piece of paper and pray over it. And I want you to hide that piece of paper. And for the next 48 hours, you're not allowed to obsess over it. You're handing it over. Now, go take a walk, go journal, or call a friend and talk about something else. Take this crap out of your mind. And before we start to close this out, I wasn't going to do music on this podcast, but I will put a short playlist below in the description. If you want to listen to some music, you can click on that link. It'll be a YouTube video link down in the description. Just click on it, and maybe one of the songs will ease your mind. But before we close today, I want you to remember a few things. You don't have to stop loving to let go. And you don't have to stop praying to surrender. You don't have to stop hoping to trust God. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't hanging on tighter. It's opening your hands and believing that God who gave you this burden is also strong enough to carry it. If you're exhausted, rest. If you're grieving, grieve. If you're waiting, keep trusting. If you've been trying to carry the entire world on your shoulders, maybe today is the day that you finally set it down, right at the feet of Jesus. Because here's what I learned. God never asked us to carry tomorrow. He asked us to walk with him today. And that being said, I want to say a short prayer. So, if you have the opportunity, you can bow your head and pray with me. So, Father, this is one of the hardest prayers I'll ever pray, because letting go feels frightening. It feels like we're losing something precious. But today, we're asking you to teach us the difference between surrender and giving up. Help us to release what was never ours to control while holding tightly on to you. Strengthen those who are exhausted, comfort those who are grieving, and give peace to those whose minds race throughout the night. Give wisdom to those who are waiting, and remind every person listening that you have not forgotten them, even in the silence, even in the waiting, even when the answer hasn't come yet. Just walk with us. Hold us. Carry what we cannot. And I pray for the person right now, Father, whose heart is racing as I speak. I pray for the one who feels like they're in a mess that they can't clean up. Give them the strength to be still. Quiet the what-ifs in their mind and replace them with your I am. Grant them a peace that doesn't make sense to the world, but makes perfect sense to their soul. And I ask all this in your precious Son's holy name, Jesus Christ. Amen. So thank you for spending this time with me today. This episode spoke to your heart. I hope you can share it with somebody who needs to hear it. We all know someone who's carrying something quietly. Maybe this conversation will remind them that they're not alone, and maybe it reminds you that you're not alone either. And whatever you're facing this week, don't confuse silence with God's absence. He's still working, even when you can't see what he's doing. Keep showing up, keep praying, keep loving, and keep trusting the one who never lets you go. You don't need all the answers to have a good day. You just need enough light for the next step. Keep going forward, keep staying positive, and remember that being cracked open is how the light gets in. So if today's episode helped you, share it with someone who's carrying a burden that they were never meant to carry alone, because you never know. Your willingness to reach out may be the answer to someone else's prayer. And remember, learning to let go isn't giving up on what God can do. It's trusting him enough to stop trying to do his job while faithfully doing yours. So until next time, keep your heart open, keep your faith alive, and never forget, your character shapes your reputation, and your integrity shapes your legacy. And your legacy may become someone else's hope. You don't have to know how God is going to work to trust the God who is already at work. You aren't alone in the waiting. God can even use the waiting to shape you, strengthen you, and draw you closer to him. Not deserving suffering and not understanding suffering are two different things. Scripture is full of faithful people who couldn't make sense of what they were living while they were living it. Job never got the explanation he wanted. Joseph spent years in prison before he understood what God was doing. David spent years running before he ever wore the crown. None of them were handed the whole story. None of them were told, here's the plan. What they were given was enough grace for the next step. Maybe that's all God is asking you today. One step, one prayer, one act of faith, one breath at a time. I'll see you next week. One prayer, one act of faith, one breath at a time. And remember, peace doesn't come from knowing the outcomes. It comes from knowing who's walking with you until it arrives. And the moment you place it in God's hands is not the moment that you stop caring. It's the moment that you stop carrying. I want you to have a great week. Thank you for those who shared my podcast, who have subscribed, liked, and commented. I appreciate all of you. Please continue to do so. I love you guys. This has been Cracked Open, and I'm Glen Nunes. I'll see you next time. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Cracked Open. If today's episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need a little light in their own dark season. Remember, even in brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found. Every crack is a place where the light can shine through. Until next time, stay true, stay hopeful, and keep your heart open.